settlements and settlements will rebuild, so we don't raise our budget. Is that true?
Well, I mean, that is an issue.
It's a practical matter of here and now today.
So as I was mentioning earlier, this is different than most of my other classes. This is different than most of my other classes, and that I don't even consider myself anywhere close to being an expert. So I've got two fact checkers here with me. Aiden's going to help when I screw up on something, and Connor can jump in too. When I screw up, or if you have a question that I can't answer, they can help as well.
I have one suggestion, that we open in a word of prayer with Pastor Carl, because this is a very emotional subject, and it's quite complex, and I think we need every bit of the spirit. So if you'd be open to that, Dan.
Yeah. A couple of things. So this is 3 parts, and it'd be great if you could get to all 3. This will be 3 perspectives. And today I'm going to be talking about Palestinian Christians. There's a little bit of feedback. Palestinian Christians, and then we'll be talking about things from a Muslim perspective, and then we'll be talking about this from a Jewish perspective. In the 3 weeks, we're taking the 10th off. It'll be March 3rd and then March 17th. And then today at 4 o'clock, there's a forum held at Plymouth Church. And that's going to have the same 3 perspectives together. Plymouth Church is on East Hampshire in Milwaukee. So if you would go ahead and pray, that'd be great.
Oh, gracious God, help us remember the words of Jesus when he looked over Jerusalem and said, oh, if they only knew the way that makes for peace. Help us understand the hatred, the hopes, the desires to live on the land and feel safe and to nurture our families. Help us to understand the war that is going on and give us enlightenment to do the right things. Amen.
So I asked several friends what I should do with this first class. Should I do a background to give everybody background on the whole situation there? Or should I talk about Palestinian Christians? Because a lot of us don't know who the Palestinian Christians are and how they fit into this. And if I should talk about the evangelical Christians and their perspective, because they're so influential. I asked 6 people, 2 said A, 2 said B, and 2 said C. So I'm going to try to do all 3. And I said a lot of things are new, but one thing hasn't changed. We're going to start with a quiz, okay? We're going to do the background, and I want you guys to answer the questions for me. We're going to go through this quickly, and then we're going to go again through it slowly. So you should get 100% the second time. So the first one, what is the name of the movement to establish a Jewish homeland of Palestine? Zionism. And it came, this is about when that this starts?
1930s?
1880s, and the first Zion conference is in 1887. We have Theodore Herzl here who helps establish it. He's mentioned in the Constitution, but doesn't make it. He dies in 1904. Which country was given control over Palestine after the First World War? Britain is right. The British Mandate. Now, why did they want it?
Empire.
Access to the Suez Canal. So that's what they wanted. What they didn't want were Jewish people and Palestinian people fighting with each other. So, okay. Third one, what event had a decisive influence on the formation of the State of Israel? Holocaust, right. So we got a lot of Holocaust things here. We got the people moving in from Germany. We have Auschwitz. Who's been to Auschwitz here? Good, yeah. And then International Holocaust Day. Which entity proposed splitting Palestine into 2 states, 1 Arab and 1 Jewish? Britain gave up control, and who took over for a short while?
United Nations?
United Nations did. And this is their plan that they put out. The light blue would be Israel, the dark blue would be the Arab land, and then Jerusalem would be internationally controlled. It's pretty different from today. The Jews said, yes, we'll take it. The Arabs said, no, we don't want that. What is the date for the founding of the state of Israel? And what do Palestinians call this date? Anybody have any idea?
February 48th.
48?
48's right. You want to guess a month now?
February.
Later.
Mark?
Close. May 14th, 1948. So while this argument is going over the partition plan, David Ben-Gurion says, we're a nation, bam, we're in here, and then a war starts. The Arab-Israeli conflict starts the next day. There is an interesting thing for those who went to my Dead Sea Scrolls classes. A bunch of scrolls were exchanged over the fences on that day. They declared war, and they just made it through. Otherwise, we would not know some of the Dead Sea Scrolls or where they went. And what do Palestinians call this day? They celebrate it on the 15th. Anybody know this? It's called the Nakba, the catastrophe, because as a result of the creation of the state of Israel, 700,000 Palestinians are either flee or forcibly removed. And so this is not an Independence Day for them. And I think it's the 75th, we had the 75th Nakba last year. What was the name of the organization created? So we're going through year by year. So Nakba 48, things settled down for a little while, and it's not resolved. And then in 1964, a group is formed to organize all of the Palestinian opposition. What is that?
PLO.
Right. Everybody remembers Yasser Arafat. Bart Ehrman used to say, if you want to understand what Jesus looked like, look at Yasser Arafat, which would terrify a lot of people. But he was just trying to say, he's a short guy, probably not very big, and looked like someone from that community. What was the name of the 1967 war that took less than a week for Israel to defeat a coalition of 6 Arab states and to seize all of that territory?
Is that the Six-Day War?
It was the 6-Day War, which is a pretty amazing thing. At that time, people thought, if we just get ourselves together, we can crush Israel, destroy it, wipe it out. But instead, within 6 days, no one had any idea what sort of tanks they had, or what sort of planes they had. But look at this, just the day before, the first of that week, you have this is what it looked like. By the end of the week, they had the Sinai Peninsula, Gaza, the West Bank. Why is it called West Bank? So the West Bank of Jordan River, right? And they have the Golan Heights. So that looks great, except for they didn't want to supervise all of these 2 million Palestinians. So for the last 50 years, they've been exchanging land for peace. While the Palestinians want to get their land back, the Israelis have been giving them pieces in exchange for peace, or attempts at peace, which has worked to some degree, not greatly in other instances. What is the name of the series of Palestinian protests, riots, and civil disobedience from 1987 to 91 in response to the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip?
The Intifada.
The first Intifada. 2,000 Palestinians. And what happens to put this together as a narrative? You see, Israel is created as a state, and that moves people off the land, creating tension. These other states decide they'll crush them through traditional military means. It doesn't work, so the Intifada is to use guerrilla means to try to beat them. That's the Intifada. Hamas is established during this time, which represented the use of terrorism and so forth. And you see in this bottom picture, the Israeli with the gun, conventional war, Palestinian with a rock, guerrilla means. So what you have is, this ends up driving the two sides together, and what happens as a result? The interim peace agreements in which Israel accepted the PLO as the representative of the Palestinian people, and the PLO renounced terrorism and recognized Israel's right to exist. What was that called? The Oslo Accords. So the narrative is, so they tried to use guerrilla means, drive both to the table, and Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat shaking hands It took a week to get them to agree to this. They had to get Yasser Arafat to agree not to carry a gun with him into this area. And they had to not just say yes, but they had to shake hands. And what's the impact of this? People on the right,
Assassination.
the exact people on the left, who was the Israeli prime minister who was assassinated in 1995 by Israeli ultranationalists opposed to recent peace talks. And that was Rabin. Same year, 1995, when the second accord. And the result is you go from attempts at peace, and they alienate people in Palestine. Hamas is energized, and ultranationalists are energized on the Israeli side. And we're living still as a result of those things. Hamas is still in power, and Netanyahu, who represents the far right, is in power on that side. This is down here, the songbook that Herbert Rabin had put in his jacket pocket. He had just sung the song, the peace song, and the bullet went right through it. And then which group did you raise your hand?
No, I wanted the Camp David Accords.
1979, and that's what, I skipped past it because I can't get through all of these things, but the Camp David Accords in 1979, that's when Egypt and Israel make peace. And it leads to assassination of the Egyptian president. And they end up getting the Sinai Peninsula back as a result of that. Dave Connor, is that right? Okay, that's my understanding. And I skipped like the Yom Kippur War. There's so many things, and I'm going to skip all of this stuff between 2010 and 2020, the fights between those, just because there's so many. Which group took control of Gaza shortly after Israel agreed to remove all Jewish settlements there in 2005, ending the Second Intifada uprising? Which group took control of Gaza at that time? Hamas did. Do you understand what happens there? So the Intifada is going on. It's starting in the year 2000. In the year 2002, Israel builds the wall around the West Bank. They continue to fight, and Israel decides to remove its settlers from Gaza, forcibly remove them. They remove them, and then Gaza holds an election in 2006, and Hamas wins, much to everybody's surprise. Not a huge victory. They get 44% of the vote, and who did they beat? Whoever they beat. They defeated 44 to 41%, but there's not ever been another election. And then they gained control of all of the branches of government in the year 2007. And then finally, which city did? And so as a result of this, the two sides moving further and further apart, becoming more and more extreme. The decision is made by the Trump administration to negotiate just with one side. In the past, we'd always negotiate with both sides, but Trump decides I'll only negotiate with the one side. And as a result, he recognizes which city is the capital of Israel and orders the U.S. Embassy to move to
Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Right. So I like that people went after to see what he stuck in the wall. You know, up there you can put little notes in, and after he left, all sorts of people went trying to find what it was. So, okay, so now we're going to run through this a little more quickly and try to understand the whole narrative of what's going on. So we start with the Zionist movement in the 1800s. Now there are lots of people already in Palestine. Okay, you've got 200,000 Palestinians living there, a couple of thousand Jewish people, and some Christians living on that area. And the Christians and the Muslims get along extremely well. All three groups get along pretty well at that time. Then the British people want control of the Suez Canal. But before they do this, in the year 1916, they promised the Arabs that they'll help them form a country in the Palestine area. In 1917, they have the Balfour Declaration. Balfour Declaration is they tell the Jews that they'll help them form a state in the same area. So you have same promise to two different groups, which ends up igniting the whole area. because both feel like they've been promised this, and the British don't deliver with either one. Jews start pouring into the area at that point. So that in just a couple of years, there's so many people that in the years 1939, the British have to slow down and stop the number of people coming there. But you know, it ends up forcing people in another direction because of World War II. You all remember the story of the St. Louis? The boat, the St. Louis, had 935 Jewish people from Germany, and they're fleeing the Holocaust. They end up going to Cuba. Cuba won't accept them. Comes to the United States. We won't accept them.
FDR did.
Goes to Canada. They won't accept them. Goes back. 235 of the people were killed in the Holocaust, and the other people spread throughout Europe. People didn't really want the Jewish people, and so when they decide to come here, it's already occupied, but so it creates a fight between the two sides. And as I said, with the Holocaust, it was the term you'll see a lot is Shoah, which is it was 937 people who were on the boat. But yeah, by the time 1947 rolls around, we have 600,000 Jews living there and 1.3 million Arab people. So 2 to 1. But we've grown from just a little more than 200,000 in the year 1917 to 2 million people 30 years later.
Can you pause for a second?
Yeah.
Before 1880, 90 was it?
18,
The first slide you had.
1880s,
Okay,
and then 1880s.
Before that was the country Palestine? Was it what? Was it just?
It would belong until the year it belonged from 1516 to 1917 to the Ottoman Turks. And what happens is that World War II goes on. Ottoman is called the sick man of Europe. It's in deep trouble, not doing very well. And England decides that it wants to defeat it, but it can't defeat it on its own. So that's when they ask Jewish fighters and Arab fighters to join with them in defeating them. And in exchange, they offer them setting up states in those two areas.
Were they essentially Islam?
The Arabs? Yeah, the Arabs were.
So the area was called what? Ottoman
The Ottoman Empire.
Ottoman Empire. Okay.
The OTTOMAN, Ottoman Empire.
And-
It had been around for, I don't know, how long has the Ottoman Empire been around? For a long, long time. They had owned that land since the 1516.
Okay. So when it was the Ottoman Empire,
It was
Jewish people.
It was a pretty comfortable and safe place to be. What starts to change things is the pogroms that happen in Europe. The pogroms are when groups decide to start attacking Jews because of what they believe and stuff. And there's one particular incident that drives this whole thing. Anybody know what that is? That gets Theodore Herzl all up in arms and that he wants to do something.
The Jews are starting to be expelled from Russia.
That's part of it.
Okay.
It's the Dreyfus affair.
Oh, in France. Okay.
In France, there's a captain in the military who's accused of spying. He's a Jewish guy. There's no evidence for it, but he's treated that way, and people then see how ingrained anti-Semitism is within a place that's supposed to be progressive. And so Herzl said, the only way this is going to work for us is if we have our own land. But he didn't look at the holy city first. He looks first at Argentina. Then he looks second. Anybody know where he goes second? It was what was called Uganda, but now it's Kenya. And they look at that, and England agrees that they would help them do that, but they reject it. And then they decide, let's go for Palestine.
okay, and then say the last part again. Britain needed help from both sides for what?
It's World War II when they were fighting the Ottoman Empire.
World War One.
It's World War I.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to go back just briefly? I know this is a lot of history in a short period of time. So there's the 1880s, 1890s, then the World War I happens. Everybody know when World War I occurred? 1914 to 1918. and at the end of the war, Britain gets this land, okay?
And they got it because both,
Because they defeated the other side, and the French and the British get to divide up the world. And so they sit around the table smoking cigars and drawing lines on maps.
Wasn't oil a big factor in that too?
Oil was a big factor too, access to oil. But the main thing that was driving the perspective of the French, but the British wanted access to India because they could go down through the Suez Canal and over, okay? You get that? Then starting at that time, because of some of the problems that are going on in Europe, Jews start coming down and moving into this area, but there are already a lot of people living there. So it's a small area. You know, the Gaza Strip, which we've been talking about, this little area where all the fighting's going on. I mean, first, the whole state of Israel is smaller than the state of New Jersey. Okay, you got to think about that. And then you got to think about the area they're fighting about. The Gaza Strip, 25 miles long, 7 miles wide.
Milwaukee.
So that's what they're fighting about.
About Milwaukee.
21 miles.
Except for the lakes on the other side.
But
So let's go. So here's the partition plan. So most of this area was covered with settlements by Palestinian Muslims and Christians primarily, with some Jews. And then the partition plan occurs, and this is what they've got. The Jewish people say, yes, we'll take this. The Arabs say no, because they're losing most of their land. But they're also, most nobody lives down in this small bottom part. It's desert, or wilderness, as it says in the New Testament.
So is it too simplistic to say we can blame this all on the British people because they made promises to both? Wait. They made promises to both sides and they didn't fulfill their promise to either side?
John Oliver likes to blame them on this show. I think a lot of people can get blamed from the beginning to the end. I mean, you can blame the Romans for kicking the Jews out in the year 70 during the Great Revolt. Are you familiar with that? So in the year 70, the Jews revolt against Rome, and it's like the first Holocaust. Probably up to 1 million Israelis who were living there, called Judeans at that time, are killed by the Romans. They crucify so many people, they run out of wood in Jerusalem. And the historian, what'd you say? Josephus says he walks through with the general, looking at people, and he sees 3 of his friends, all of them alive, and asks on crosses, and they ask if they can take them down off the crosses. They take down 2, they take down all 3. 1 dies, but 2 of them continue to live after that fact. So, I mean, you can go way back. Go ahead.
How did they decide on this particular partition?
I don't know the answer to that. Maybe our 2 fact checkers can help. Do you know, Dave? Do you know, Connor? Yeah, you struck out. 0 for 3. But you see, Jerusalem's not controlled by anybody at this time. Okay, what is the date of the founding? Now, this is just a date you should know, whether you're in this class or not. You should just know that's May 14th, 1948. But, you know, there's the fighting over the partition plan, and Israel just says, boom, this is where it is, we're a state, and that's starting today. And who's the first one to recognize them as a state?
United States.
On what day? May 14th, 1948. Right now, 85% of the countries in the UN recognize them as a state.
Was that Truman then?
Yeah.
Yeah. It would have been right, shortly before the election. And then the Nakba, which is the 700,000 Palestinians who are moved out. It's not just Muslims, it's a lot of Christians being moved out of this area too.
So there was also a significant number of Jews who were expelled from Islamic countries at that time. There were a significant number of Jews living in Alexandria and also Cairo, and they were expelled from Egypt at that time. So just to let you know that.
Yeah, no, that's good. Like I said, both of you could jump in at any time. Go ahead.
I thought I heard that before 48, there were Jewish more or less terrorists attacking the British.
You can, if you want to go down a rabbit hole, type in and go type in before 1948 massacre, and you will see that both sides are not naming a lot of groups. There is a military force. The British have a military force that's doing a lot of things right then. It's a group called the Haganah, is the police force that become the Israeli Defense Forces. And on November 17th, when Moshe's here, you can talk to him. He fought and fought with distinction in the Israeli Defense Force. But they went into communities, raided. They had to clear the land somehow for themselves. And so yes, there are a number of massacres. There are documentaries on 2 of the massacres that have come out in the last couple of years.
So were the British forced into this, or did they?
They got it, and then they didn't want it because this is all this fighting and stuff, and they just wanted the advantage of trade. They didn't want to oversee this mess. So then
They
it
were
goes.
happy to get rid of it.
They were happy when the UN took over.
But one historian said they were masters of dividing the Arabs so they could control the oil. And they pitted one against the other politically just so they had control of the oil fields.
But by the end of the Second World War, when there was a movement to set up a country for Jewish people escaping the Holocaust, and so at that time, I think that they were going to have that under their control as well, and so there's no interest in being in that situation. So now we're up to the PLO, and this is when we're not quite sure. The 2 sides aren't sure if they go to war, who's going to win. And the PLO helps organize and get together and says we will be more effective if we're all under one group. And at that time, everyone considers them to be a terrorist organization. They later move away from that, but at this time, that's what's going on. And then we had the 6-day war, which is just incredible. And among most Israelis is considered a miracle because that they could in 6 days beat 6 Arab countries around them and get all this land. At the same time, most people believe they didn't want all this land, but I mean, it gave them access for a short while to the Suez Canal. You asked about the Camp David Accords, and the Camp David Accords they gave back the Sinai Peninsula. So, go ahead.
Wasn't there a lot of fighting in 1948 too?
1948, 49 well, the Israelis won, and that's what leads to the Nakba. They end up moving 700,000 Palestinians off their land.
Were the other Arab nations fighting Israel, or was it just the Palestinians?
It was several groups. It's called the Arab-Israeli War. 1948 and 49, they stopped in 49. It did not go well. The Israelis are just better fighters in conventional war than all of these people around them.
Okay, another question, sorry.
Go.
Palestinians. Palestinians is synonymous with Muslim, with Arab,
No, it's
with
not.
what?
Actually, we're not going to get to it if we keep up at this rate, but we're going to get to the Palestinian Christians. The Christians in the area are not in the state of Israel for the most part. They live mainly in the West Bank, which is it's primarily Muslims, but it's also some Christians who are generally Arab in the background.
But they've been moving a
So
lot.
that,
They moved out 700,000. Some went to Gaza, some went to the West Bank, some went to Jordan, some went to Egypt. They went in all sorts of different directions.
so when you say they moved the Palestinians out, is that Palestinian Christians and Palestinian Muslims?
Yes.
It's like, think of Palestine, when you're thinking Palestinians, think of it like Americans. Americans have all different backgrounds, but it's because we're here. So Palestinians is because they were in Palestine, not
But
necessarily.
it's overwhelmingly, Palestinians are overwhelmingly Muslims, with a significant minority of Palestinian Christians.
Now, yeah.
And these 700,000 displaced people end up in large refugee camps in Jordan, in Egypt, and in Lebanon. And one of the
And in Gaza.
in Gaza, and one of the aspirations of those people who are displaced to this day is to be returned to their land.
And that's why they call it the Nakba. They believe, and their celebration of Nakba is frequently to hold up keys. Does anyone know why they do this?
Because they left their homes.
They were removed from their homes and they plan to go back to their homes. But most of them, the homes have been bulldozed. But in other cases, the homes are still there and the keys would still work. So, okay,
So I just read something, I want to know if it's true, that when the Palestinians, some of them were evicted from their homes, that they were promised by the UN or whatever that they would be compensated,
I don't know about that.
and that they weren't. You don't know that. Okay, I read this and I don't know if this is true or not.
Okay, where'd you read it?
There was recently something saying that who was anti-Jewish and that formerly belonged to SNCC, SNCC, and they had a paper from 1962. It was their SNCC paper, and it talked all about how bad the Jewish
Stop.
people were.
Okay, we're on a rabbit hole. I'm
Yes,
not gonna
yes,
go down
yes.
there.
That's what you asked for, I found that.
But the story I want you to understand is there's the occupation, I mean, they move in, creates tension, there's war. The Israelis are really good at this war. They win everything. They win the whole game on that 6-day war. And it looks like they're gonna lose it in the Yom Kippur War, but they still hang on to it. Then they start trying to establish peace. Palestinians are still upset, and so they decide instead of conventional warfare to start doing things like the first Intifada. Second Intifada, 3,000 Palestinians are killed and 1,000 Jewish people. So it's this guerrilla war that's going on in the streets. You've seen these pictures of people throwing rocks at each other and stuff. I mean, they can't beat them with their guns for the most part, or their tanks, or any of that stuff. So this is what it goes to. And then it moves to the Oslo Accord. And a lot of people in America thought, we've solved the problem. Everything's okay. They've established this. The Palestinians acknowledge the state of Israel exists, and we've got steps in place to create a Palestinian state where the West Bank is and where Gaza is. And no one expected the people on the far right to reject this and immediately assassinate Rabin in 1995. Since that time, the people on the far right and the people in the far right of Palestine and on the far right of Israel have maintained control over the situation. Netanyahu, as far to the right as we've ever had as a prime minister, Hamas has no interest in giving up terrorist techniques. So that's where we are today. You have Hamas move into power in 2006, gain control of the whole Gaza area in 2007. If you had an election today in the West Bank, Hamas would win. Recent polls in the past month have shown that it's 70-30 in favor of Hamas. So it's a terrifying situation. If we get a group that's committed to terrorist activities, we'll be all the way back to 1964. And then Trump decided, instead of trying to deal with both parties, he was just going to deal with one. And so he negotiates just with Israel. As soon as he does the Jerusalem thing, the Palestinians we're out of here. Because Jerusalem belongs to whom? The Jews think it belongs to them, the Christians think it belongs to them, and the Muslims think it belongs to them. For Muslims, it's the third holiest site that there is. And in the year 2000, the guy running for prime minister decides to go up onto the Temple Mount and to the mosque, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and that starts the second Intifada. So that's where we are. My second topic today,
Can I just say there's chairs over here? People standing, there's chairs over here.
and this is a perspective, I'm not telling you to think about or believe or anything, but this is one of the three perspectives we're gonna see. We're gonna see the Christian, Palestinian perspective on what's going on this week. Next week, we're gonna see a Muslim perspective, and in 3 weeks, we're gonna see a Jewish perspective, okay? So try to make it to all three of them so you can get a holistic perspective on this thing. So here we are, Christians in Palestine. So Christians have been in Palestine, as you were saying, since a long time ago. Some of them trace themselves all the way back to 135, when Jews are completely expelled and Jerusalem's renamed. Most of them are Eastern Orthodox, some are Catholic, and then a few of them are Protestant. But there's an extremely prominent Protestant pastor there. And some of us who went on one of my trips to Israel went to the church, and met the pastor. We'll talk about that in a second. So here are the numbers in Palestine, according to the British mandate. So this is when they were in charge. They did a census. They wanted to know how many people they had. And Christians account for 9.5% of the total population, and 10% of the Palestinian Arabs in Palestine then. So almost 10% of the people living in Palestine at that time were Christian. By the time we got to 1946, it had dropped to 7.9%, and that's for the entire area. And now there are very few Christians in Jerusalem or in Israel, but just in the West Bank area, they represent between 1% and 2.5%. Two different polls show different counts. It's a small group of people there. And in general, there are 500,000 Palestinian Christians around the world. And you see the numbers here at the bottom. Palestinian Christian are Greek Orthodox largely. There are Armenian Orthodox as well. And it says Latin Catholic. It means people who do it, the service is still in Latin. And then evangelicals and Protestant form a smaller amount. So just to let you know, this is an initiative that the ELCA is currently pushing. It's called Sumud. It means steadfastness. And if you go online, they're encouraging you during this series of this time in Lent to go along with this and learn the perspective of Palestinian Christians. This is the introduction. I'm going to show you just the introduction so you can see what it's like. And if you want to, there are 6 videos that go along with this. This is just the introduction.
Welcome to the Sea of Galilee. This is the place where Jesus first called the disciples, when he walked on water, when he gave the Sermon on the Mount, when he fed the 5,000, and when he appeared after he was resurrected to eat grilled fish on the beach and tell Peter to feed my sheep. So much of Jesus' ministry was centered right here in the communities around the Sea of Galilee. And so it is a perfect place to begin this series, Following the Way of Jesus, a Lenten Holy Land journey. The Sea of Galilee is very close to where I grew up as a Palestinian Christian. For me, like the people of Jesus' time, the water was not just a place for Bible stories. It was where I had my first job, where my family would come to swim, and where we came on the shore and watched the fishermen who still today catch fish with nets, like the disciples did. And the type of fish, now called St. Peter fish, is also the same. Christians come here from all over the world to follow in the footsteps of Jesus. But what does this really mean? For me, it's not just about geography. It is about ministry. The footsteps of Jesus walked here in the Holy Land, but they also followed the specific path, one that Jesus again and again called the Kingdom of God or Kingdom of Heaven. During Lent, we remember how the way of Jesus brought him and his disciples on a journey of justice, faith, and service that led to the cross and to the empty tomb. Early Christians, we are told, called the new faith the way. And the way of Jesus, his identity, his life, and his message still matter to people all over the world.
So far,
and
fine.
especially the indigenous Christian community of the Holy Land.
Okay, this is
The
where it starts
Palestinian
to
Christian
see their
community
perspective on this.
I come from. Our Lenten journey will follow the way of Jesus through key events in his life, bringing us to the places where these events happen. But more than that, we will also bring you to the people, the living body of Christ in the Holy Land. We will hear the stories and perspectives of Palestinian Christians, Despite living in this land for many generations and being part of a local Christian presence that has been here since the time of Jesus, many Palestinians, Christians, do not have the freedom to come to the Sea of Galilee. And they do not have many of the freedom and human rights that Jesus proclaimed were God's intentions for all people, especially the vulnerable and those with less power.
In this season of Lent, we think of Jesus' time of trial, tribulation, the 40 days he spent in the wilderness.
This
And
is the
I thought
prominent
what
Lutheran pastor.
The devil tried to tempt Jesus with, why don't you make something splashy, supernatural, and turn the stones into bread? Jesus' answer was very important. Man shall not live by bread alone. This is where Jesus realized that bread is important. But bread alone is not what gives meaning to life. The trial and tribulation of the people of Palestine over the years, it looks like we're destined to live these 40 days of trials and tribulations here. Once we accept that, yeah, bread is important, but it's not enough. What comes from the mouth of God is what gives meaning, what gives a calling. It's a new dimension to life. And this will help us endure, persist. To me, this is the principle of the mood. Accepting God's calling to us. Once we accept that, it becomes easier to be resilient in the midst of trials and tribulations. But if we think that it's bread only that we're after, it becomes so tempting to leave. It becomes so tempting to go elsewhere. Find better bread, cheaper bread, easier bread.
What do you do when daily life is a constant struggle, when your future is not guaranteed, and when people around the world often use your own Bible to tell you that you do not belong in your homeland? For Palestinian Christians, the answer is we stay. We have faith. We remain steadfast in who we are and who we know God is. The Arabic word for this steadfastness is sumud. In the coming series,
That's it. If that interests you, go online, type in Samud on YouTube, and you can follow this during the Lenten season if you want. So that's their perspective, and I'm going to make it come out a little bit sharper in just a second. And these are some of the things that, when they were talking about here, I'll point out things. Here's Jerusalem, and he was saying they couldn't get to the wall. He's right here in Bethlehem, but between the two, right around this green area of the West Bank is the wall. And for anybody here, has anyone here gone into the West Bank? Raise your hand if you have. I have. And you have to, it's sometimes incredibly secure. I've been through it where like 8 or 10 military people come on, check everything. Another time we had one, but it always takes a long time to do it. And so he was saying, and then to get up here to the Sea of Galilee, you've got to get out as well. So he was saying he doesn't have access to any of that stuff. Now we're going to visit some of the, here's the Samud initiative as the ELCA's raising it. So again, this is the perspective that they're putting forth. Calling for a negotiated resolution to the Israeli occupation of Palestine. Seeking equal human rights and human dignity for all people in the Holy Land. Demanding an end to Israeli settlement building and occupation of Palestinian land. For those who don't understand this, let me go back. Oh, didn't mean to do that. For those not aware of it, if you don't know what the occupied territory is, it's here in the West Bank where Jewish settlers are just building houses all over here, even though it's behind the wall. And evangelical Christians are spending a lot of money helping them there. In 2005, Israel removed all of the settlements down here in the Gaza Strip. So the settlements are all up here. You have more than 100,000 Jewish people now living in the West Bank, okay? So that's what they're saying, to stop these settlements. Demanding an end to Israeli settlement building and occupation of Palestinian land, requesting an examination of U.S. military aid, and pursuing a viable political solution for sharing of the land. The problem with that is, Many people say they support a two-state solution, but Hamas does not support that, and Netanyahu doesn't. So they're the two most powerful people involved, and neither want to do that. So now let's look at Lutheran churches. A couple of them. If you've been with me to Israel, and you've probably been to the Church of the Redeemer. Who's been to the Church of the Redeemer? Yeah, it's great. We sat through a sermon there. Here's what the church looks like on the inside. It's in the old city. So the whole walled off old city of Jerusalem is where you go, and there's this garden area in the outside area. It's great. It's one of the tallest buildings around in Old Jerusalem. And then there was this place in Bethlehem, Evangelical Lutheran Christmas Church. Has anyone been there? Was anybody there when you had dinner there with us? Yeah, that was great. And then we talked, and the person who spoke was this guy. His name is, well, we'll see. He got international attention for this. This is their nativity scene. It's called Christ in the Rubble. And he explains in just a second why he built this. He did his Christmas sermon was called Christ in the Rubble. Luther is called Esau.
History will hold them accountable. This is the time to act. This is the time to speak. History will hold you accountable, and history will ask, where were you when this was happening in Gaza? When children were killed on such an unprecedented level that we've seen in recent history, where were you? And if the answer is, we were praying for peace, this is the kind of soft spirituality that have been challenging, and many of us have been challenging, because it gives the comfort that we're peaceful, we're good people. We pray for both sides equally. And I think true peacemaking demands that we take sides, demands that we speak truth to power and hold things by their name. This is the time to act and to speak and to put pressure. And this is the time to act by our moral and ethical standards as Christians who are demanded to speak justice, to defend the oppressed, and to be thirsty even. You know, Jesus said, blessed are those who are thirsty, hungry for righteousness. Right now, the situation in Gaza is beyond horrible. It's literally hell on earth. And I think as many people will continue to ask, where was God? Me as a pastor, I will continue to ask, where was the church?
So that's his perspective as a prominent Christian Palestinian on this. I'm going to show you now that there's a group in particular that these individuals are opposed to, and that is evangelical Christians living in America, because evangelical Christians pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into helping the Israelis, while the people like him are on the Palestinian side, even though they're both Christians. Evangelical Christians overwhelmingly, you'll see the Speaker of the House up in the right corner. It's a group called Christians United for Israel. These two guys in the bottom are at Megiddo, where Armageddon is supposed to happen, and they're planting flags for the United States and Israel at Megiddo, where they're supposed to be the last battle So this is 2017, 80% of evangelicals believe establishment of Israel fulfills biblical prophecy. So if you believe that, you're going to do all you can to help Israel. Oops.
There's a church in the city of Bethlehem. It was built on the spot where Christians believe Jesus was born. It's called the Church of the Nativity. If you consult UNESCO's list of World Heritage Sites or ask travel expert Rick Steves, both will tell you that the church is in Palestine.
I just showed you where Bethlehem was. It's on the other side of the wall.
The church's location came up during a round of Jeopardy in January 2020.
Built in the 300s AD, the Church of the Nativity.
What is Palestine?
No, what is Israel? That's it.
That answer set off something of an internet
As you would
firestorm.
expect.
That's because what you call this land and who controls it is at the center of a decades-long conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. But more recently, there is also a third group that is becoming more and more influential here and throughout the Middle East: American evangelical Christians. Today, evangelical Christians are one of the most politically powerful voting blocs in the United States. And in the Trump administration, they've been given unprecedented power.
This
They've
is
turned
3 years
support
ago,
for
the
Israel
video.
and hostility towards its enemies into core tenets of conservative ideology. And a big part of those policies is rooted in how they interpret the Bible. In 2016, more than a quarter of all U.S. voters identified as white evangelical Christians. One of the primary differences between evangelicals and other Christians is their relationship with the Bible.
Conservative evangelicals believe that the Bible is literally true.
Sarah Posner writes about religion for a bunch of different publications.
Many of them believe that the Bible is sort of this prophetic roadmap for modern life, that events described and prophesied in the Bible will become true.
The Bible is the most historically accurate book ever penned.
The Bible is the one book that dares to predict the future with 100% accuracy.
For evangelicals, the most important of the Bible's prophecies is the second coming, when Jesus will return to earth. The Bible doesn't say when this will happen, but it does say where.
This is Jerusalem. World history as we know it is going to end right here.
Greg Laurie is an evangelical preacher, one of several who meet regularly to advise President Trump. They are the leaders of megachurches with tens of thousands of members. And many of them, including Greg Laurie, preach a belief called Christian Zionism. The idea that the return of the Jewish people to Israel is one of a series of events that will trigger Jesus' second coming.
Jesus is telling us that the rebirth of Israel is a sign of the end, not just a sign, it's the super sign.
According to this theology, God will reward those who help Israel and punish those who don't.
Jesus will be on his throne and he separates the nations. On what basis? How they treated Zion.
Let's back up. After
They're going to just explain the history of it right in a second. This is what's driving the belief system, and this is the simplified version, okay? This is for those who know anything about very conservative fundamentalist theology. First, this is where living in the church age. Then the rapture happens, 7 years of tribulation, then Armageddon, 1,000-year rule, Satan's loosed, and then he's put into a fiery pit, and then eternity goes from there, okay? But the important thing I want to point out to you is the smallest thing on here, this little box right here. And so this is what drives the belief system. That first, the rapture comes when Jews start going to Israel, okay? So that's happening now, since 1948. And then the rapture occurs, and almost all the Jews return to Palestine in this belief system during this tribulation period. A remnant of Israel is converted. Actually, 1/3 is converted. 2/3, they get killed. But a third of the Jews are converted. Temple is rebuilt, sacrifices start, and the priesthood is restored. Okay, all this happens, and then Armageddon occurs. So this is what's driving everything that they're doing. Well, will you find one verse or one book that says this? No, this is like 10 different books of the Bible. They're cutting and pasting these things all together. This is a guy named John Nelson Darby in the 1820s. He's the first guy to come up with this whole system. Now, all of these people I've shown you so far believe this. As a kid, I was taught this in the evangelical church. In 6th grade, I had to fill this thing in to show that I got it all right. But most people aren't learning these stories that way. They're learning it through 2 books. The Late Great Planet Earth, the most popular book sold in the 1970s beside the Bible, and the Left Behind series. Both of those take that framework and turn it into fiction books. Has anyone here read the Left Behind series? That's all it is premillennial dispensationalism put in fiction form. Entertainment, and it became a movie if you wanted to see it, okay? And that's how you learn these things. But so what you have is Palestinian Christians who are living there on one side of the wall, and evangelical Christians on the other side, who are pouring money in to help Israel. We're going to show this one video. Now these are biased texts, they're biased videos. This is biased in favor of the Palestinian Christians and against the evangelical Christians. Just be aware of that going in.
People always have been God's chosen people, always will be God's chosen people.
In my last video, I walked through Bethlehem's walled-off streets and met Palestinian Christians fighting to stay on their land. But I kept thinking about how some of Israel's biggest supporters back home are not necessarily American Jews, but evangelical Christians.
Most Christians will tell you, well, we love Israel because God says, I will bless those who bless my people.
So why do American evangelicals support a state that directly hurts Palestinians, including their fellow Christians?
You have my sisters and brothers who are supposed to be my support, actually doing all their best to support the ones who are oppressing us. It makes me angry.
Here's something that might surprise you. White evangelical Christians in the U.S. are more than twice as likely as American Jews to believe that God gave Israel to the Jewish people. Now, not all evangelicals believe this, but the ones that do, their voices are often the loudest and most influential.
The title deed to the land of Israel is recorded in the Bible, which gives the Jewish people a clear and unclouded title to that land forever. It belongs to them, and it belongs to them only.
People that share this view are called Christian Zionists. They believe the Bible commands them to support and defend the modern-day state of Israel, regardless of what this means for the Palestinians who live under its occupation. They point to one biblical verse in particular, Genesis 12:3, that they believe references the modern state of Israel.
Genesis 12, here it is in the very beginning of the Bible. You know, I'll bless and I'll curse those who curse her.
I met Sharon Sanders in Jerusalem. She's an American Christian who moved here from Illinois in the 1980s out of a deep religious sense of mission to support Israel. She and her husband founded the charity Christian Friends of Israel, which aims to help people from recent Jewish immigrants to Israeli soldiers.
Just simply kindness of the heart to say thank you for protecting us, thank you for taking care of the land.
Her charity is one of several foreign Christian-led organizations that have flourished in Israel in recent years. It's estimated that every year evangelicals give around $200 million to Israel. Worldwide donations from the Jewish community far surpass that, but Christian contributions continue to rise and show no signs of slowing down. And some organizations specifically raise money for Israeli settlements in the occupied.
So I'm going to stop it there. If you want to watch the rest of it, you can. I want you, instead of just hearing from her and her perspective, I want you to hear even a fundamentalist Christian explain why he's so supportive of the state of Israel.
The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been the focal point of geopolitical instability in the Middle East since the establishment of Israel.
Thank God they are raising their voices on this issue louder and louder every day.
Here we go.
Another Christian Holy Land tour leader is evangelical pastor Urban Baxter, whose end-time ministries takes its flock to Israel twice a year. The focus of their tours is actually the real reason evangelicals overwhelmingly want the Jews to control all of Israel, which is the actual end times, as in Armageddon. Because, according to their interpretation of the Bible, Jewish control of the Holy Land will lead directly to the second coming of Christ.
The word Armageddon is actually two words, Har Megiddo, or Hill of Megiddo. You are standing on the Hill of Megiddo right now. The final act of the book of Revelation is going to begin right here at this place. And when Israel's about to be defeated, the Bible tells us that Jesus Christ himself will intervene. It says it this way: the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, with the trump of God. He is going to defeat the Antichrist. He's going to defeat the false prophet. Both of them will be cast alive in the lake of fire. At that time, Satan is going to be bound for the next 1,000 years.
This is that framework that I told you, just laid out.
Jesus Christ as King of Kings and Lord of Lords.
Yay, Jesus wins. This question's great. One question.
Time for a few questions.
What will be happening in Maryland?
I'm not sure it'll be there.
It's all the other local attractions associated with the apocalypse, including the most contested piece of real estate on the planet, Jerusalem, which houses some of the most sacred sites for Jews, Muslims, and Christians alike. It's also where Jesus lands at the grand finale of the end times, which doesn't pan out so great for the Jews.
Listen.
2/3 of Israel will die. In Zechariah 13, I think, maybe verse 7, 8, 9, right in that area. That 2/3 will die. 1/3 will be brought through the fire. And that 1/3 will then turn to Messiah in mass when he comes back. And the scripture says that they will run out to him and they bow to worship him. Zechariah 13:6 says they're going to notice he's got wounds in his feet and in his hand. And they say, "You're Jesus, oh Messiah. We've been so stubborn. We've been so proud. We've been so blind. Could you ever forgive us?" And 2,000 years of blindness is going to come clean off the Jewish mind. And those of us that have been caught up in the rapture and come with Jesus here too long.
Because the Christians have been raptured out.
All who are born again will have been raptured. When Jesus comes, we'll be caught up to meet him in the air. And then we will come with him to the Mount of Olives. And so we're going to be watching this whole panoramic thing unfold as the Jewish people turn to their Messiah. We're going to be converted people by the hundreds of thousands during this time. And it's going to be the best of times and the worst of times.
The worst of times, if you're one of the 2/3, which would be about 10 million Jews, versus 5 million who are saved in current numbers. One final thing, and then we can talk. I'm going over time, but just if you have questions, I'll stay as late as you want to. We don't read the Bible this way as Lutherans. We read it in a very different way. What they do is take a patchwork approach to text. They pick Zechariah 13 is what he picked right there. You saw Genesis 1. There's a reference to Daniel 7, then Revelation over here, and 1 Thessalonians in this other instance, and put it together into a narrative. In doing that, they ignore the historical and narrative meaning of these texts. They aren't telling the story unless you put the pieces together. And finally, it assumes many of the passages in the Bible are meant for us and are meant to be fulfilled in our day. And that's the assumption that drives much of this. And then it offers a novel way of reading scripture, as I told you, one that was first developed in the 1820s. So, and just before you leave, the two upcoming talks, Connor will be talking with Janan Najib on March 3rd, and I'll be talking with Moshe Katz on March 17th. So, a lot of information. Anybody have any questions or want me to go over something again? Go.
I'm wondering about the powerful ritual of Passover among the Jew, which ends, as I understand it, with next year in Jerusalem.
Okay. So what do you think?
I'm saying that you've got that fundamentalism in Orthodox Judaism.
You do in some Orthodox Jewish people who oppose the state of Israel. And when it was formed, because they believe the Messiah is the only one who should have created it, not people. So you still have that element there, and it's a strong element. We're going to go into Jewish perspectives on March 17th. We'll talk about all the different perspectives from Jews on that day. I thought you raised your hand. Someone else raised their hand? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, as you were giving your talk, there are two things that came to mind that I want to share with the group. On the 1st of January 1972, Pope Paul VI said, "If you want peace, work for justice." And the current conflagration or war or killings in the Middle East are because there are underlying injustices that we have neglected to build as peacekeepers. The second quote that came to me as you were talking was a quote from Václav Havel, who was imprisoned. He was a poet. He was imprisoned in an Eastern European country for many years, and he became the president of Czechoslovakia. He has this beautiful quote that Pat Murrah shared with me. Keep the company of those who seek the truth. Run from those who have found it.
Think about this. When you're seeing this elaborate thing that I drew up for you, the elaborate chart that I drew up. Okay, take this elaborate framework in which they've taken verses from all this. Now just think about Matthew 5, Matthew 5 is the Sermon on the Mount, which is to turn the other cheek. If someone asks for a coat, give them two. The kingdom of God belongs to the people who thirst after righteousness. All of these things, and then compare it to this. It's pretty staggering, and it's one of the things that made me decide when I was in my early 20s that I had to leave this because it just didn't make sense. You had Jesus in the book of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John telling one story, and then you had people putting together this framework. It was a completely different story and didn't seem to be the same Jesus. We had two Jesuses, and one was interested in what I call distributive justice, making sure everybody gets a just situation, and the other one's interested in retributive justice, one that wants to stick it to the people who didn't do the right thing. And that's what this is all about. This is about making sure we're up in the heavens watching all the Jews down below get killed. That's literally what they're telling you they're doing. And so you have this clash between the two Christians, and you can understand the situation that Munther, Isaac, the pastor there, is saying, I'm reading the Bible here, and then I see what they're doing over here and helping. Just recently, Samaritan's Purse, which is run by Franklin Graham, just donated 20 ambulances for the Israelis as they go to Gaza to help clean up the situation there, because Israel said they didn't have the money to do this. So you have evangelicals who are still supporting, and not just supporting, but helping fund what's going on right now. Go ahead.
There are three things I noticed. There's, first of all, the book Mankind, the late great planet Earth.
Oh, Hal Lindsey, yeah, in the 70s.
Did you read that?
Yeah, I had to read it.
He said, and this was really weird, he predicted the United States of Europe. Now you have the European Union with the euro.
He predicted lots of stuff.
Thing he was right about.
So you look at Persia as described in the Bible, because Persia allowed the Israelis to go back in 522 BC.
And they're not Arabs.
He labels them as Iran. So when you read it, you're not supposed to see the actual historical Persians. You're supposed to see Iran and apply it to today. That's his method. When you see Gog and Magog in the Bible, which are references to locations outside of Turkey, he says they're Russia today. So you have to substitute these things, and it's a whole pattern of swapping countries that are in place today to convince people that what's happening here is going to happen sometime soon. So all you have to do is turn to the Christian Broadcast Network, and you'll see people like Jack Van Impe and other people saying, here's this verse means this. His verse from Zechariah 13, where he says that a third of the Jews will be saved and a third of the 2/3 will be killed. You won't find any reference to a rapture or end times or anything like that. It's talking about what's going on during the Babylonian captivity. But he has to switch the message and convert it to something that's going on today.
And then there's another book called Mankind and Mother Earth by Dr. Arnold B. Toynbee. If you read that, you'll find that the nation of Israel are the people, the northern 10 tribes of Israel, and they are spread all over the world today.
Yeah. I've avoided Dr. Toynbee most of my life. So, anybody else have questions?
Just wanted to thank you, Dan, for an excellent presentation.
Yeah.
So thank you.
So if you do want to hang around and talk some more,